Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Game of Thrones further analysis for Season 7, Episode 2, Stormborn. In this video, I give a further analysis on the second episode of Season 7 and mention things I did not mention in my first review and talk a bit about the fan reaction to this episode. So I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Game of Thrones up to Season 7, Episode 2, but more importantly, I'll have to give a spoiler warning for plot leaks and production leaks that indicate what may happen in the rest of Season 7, so if you don't want to hear any of these spoilers, you may not want to watch this video. So, in my review for this episode, I talked about how I felt it moved a bit slower than promised, as we were told this season would have a much faster pace, and I have yet to see it. However, many others thought this episode moved extremely fast. In fact, I heard many refer to this as the most rushed episode of Game of Thrones yet. I'm sorry, but I actually really don't see it. Maybe it's not as slow moving as I initially thought. Perhaps I'm just being impatient for things to happen, but I really don't see this as moving any faster than the average Game of Thrones episode, let alone being the most rushed episode ever. Most of the episode seems to consist of exposition scenes of Daenerys preparing for her invasion, or other people hearing about her invasion or preparing to defend themselves from her invasion. Not that I'm complaining, I found it really interesting, and I feel it's totally necessary to have these scenes to set up what is to come, but it's not what I would refer to as rushed. I mean, we even got a sex scene between Grey Worm and Missandei that, in my humble opinion, went on far too long, so that's not really what I would refer to as rushed, but again, that's just me. So I've seen a lot of different opinions on Tyrion's plan to conquer the throne. Some think it's a brilliant plan, while others think it's a horrible plan. All in all, I think I heard more opinions that hate the plan, but perhaps that has to do with the videos I chose to watch. Either way, I find it interesting people have such varying opinions on it, where I myself am pretty 50-50. I can see Tyrion's point of view, and I can see later Olenna's point of view. What I find a bit ironic is some of the same people who think Tyrion's plan is awful also think the possibility of Daenerys being evil and becoming the Mad Queen is a strong possibility, because Tyrion's plan is exactly this: to prevent people from seeing her as the Mad King's daughter and someone who is only there to bring death and destruction to Westeros. Those who are worried about her becoming the Mad Queen, which by the way I'm not one of, should appreciate this even more. However, I heard several opinions expressed that Daenerys could attack King's Landing without causing such high destruction, or that by laying siege to the city she'll cause even more harm to the common people by starving out the city. And I think these opinions miss out the purpose of Tyrion's plan. First of all, I heard several people question why Tyrion refused to attack King's Landing with the Unsullied, but it's okay with sending them to Castle Rock, and they find this a contradiction. But the difference is King's Landing is a city. Castle Rock is simply a stronghold, hence there are a lot more commoners in King's Landing, and having commoners attacked or killed by a foreign army is quite different than having a foreign army attack only trained soldiers. And then I heard some suggest that attacking Castle Rock is a strategically useless move, as it's nowhere near King's Landing, and I could not possibly disagree with this more. It is the seat of power for the Lannisters, has been for centuries. Having that fall would be a massive, massive blow to Lannister forces, not just in practical terms, but more of in terms of the the morale of the troops. It would be very disheartening, and that's actually a very powerful thing as well. That's why Robb Stark proposed doing the exact same thing shortly before his death, because he knew if he did, it would give him a strategic advantage and help turn the tide of war in his favor. And from the Rock, they can move on to the whole Westerlands and cut off Cersei from her own supplies. Doing so would be a massive blow. And as for the siege being just as harmful as attacking King's Landing with Dragonfire, well, that misses the whole point of the people of Westeros seeing the High Lords of Westeros rise up against Cersei, sending a strong message that Westeros does not want Cersei as their queen. In other words, the plan isn't for the siege to last very long, meaning Dragonfire would be infinitely more destructive. And then there's the argument Daenerys could just fly her dragons directly to the Red Keep, bypassing King's Landing and attack Cersei directly without harming the common folk. Sure, she could do that. However, that would mean she could only attack all of Cersei's forces with just her 3 dragons, and maybe that's enough, but maybe not. I personally think that would be a reckless risk, in my opinion. And with the propaganda that Cersei's telling everyone about forcing savages that want to steal your land and burn your village, Tyrion is very wise to foresee that that's exactly the type of thing that Cersei would do, and he's completely right that attacking immediately with the Unsullied and Dothraki would be feeding right into her hands, so I do think Tyrion's plan does have a lot of merit. But on the other hand, the fault in Tyrion's plan is that it's giving Cersei time to regroup, which is exactly what she's been doing, as at the end of the episode we see the result of her seeking an alliance with Euron, as he completely destroyed the fleet of the Ironborn who were allied with Daenerys, and also stranding the Dornish army in Dorne. And Cersei also meets with the Tyrell bannermen to try to get them to betray the Tyrells, and if successful, then all of Daenerys' Westerosi allies would be undermined or eliminated, so Tyrion had vastly underestimated Cersei. So there is merit to what later Olenna said, as I do feel Daenerys will need to show her strength. In fact, we know this from the trailers, as the Lannisters will be successful in sacking Highgarden and thus turning the Tyrell bannermen against her, as I believe, just as Jaime said, that once Randyll Tarly joins the Lannisters, the rest will follow. So Daenerys will need to show up with her Dothraki dragons to show that she's not to be fucked with. I did find it ironic that Randyll Tarly was the one who was worried about her dragons, seeing how he's destined to be burned alive by one of them. And later, Olenna's words to Daenerys about showing strength will be like her sort of last words to her, as we know Olenna will die when the Lannisters sack Highgarden, so I think her death will motivate Daenerys to heed her advice and retake the Reach in her name. At least that's my guess. Either way, I was disappointed watching the scene with Daenerys and Lady Olenna, because I knew it would be the last time and the only time we'd see these two together. I wanted to see more of them, as they make quite a pair. So in King's Landing, Cersei made her propaganda pitch, and I noted in my review I had received several comments in the past that sounded exactly like what she was saying here, and sure enough, I saw several videos where someone stated that Cersei made valid points. I'm sorry, but no, she didn't. I think most people are able to tell how she twisted the truth to make herself look good and Daenerys look bad. Anyone who thinks that she made good points is obviously being blinded by their own bias. So, they said when Cersei said the Dothraki were coming to burn their villages and kill and rape their women, several had said, well, we've seen in the past that the Dothraki have in fact ravaged innocent villages, so she makes a good point. This, of course, fails to take into account what happened in Season 6, where it was shown that the Dothraki now have a religious type of devotion to Daenerys and completely change. For one, they're willing to cross the poison water on wooden horses, something they've never done before, and the fact that Daenerys very clearly would never allow this, as she degraded the cows who wanted to have her killed exactly for these kind of practices, and her entire time in Slaver's Bay made it clear she did not tolerate that type of behavior, not to mention how she made Yara promise not to raid and Reeve ever again, or the entire Ironborn for that matter, if she were to join her. So it makes absolutely no sense that she would allow the Dothraki to do so. And as I said, all the Dothraki's previous leadership are dead, and those who remain follow Daenerys like she's a god. So of course they would obey her in all things. So that argument ignores absolutely everything that happened with the Dothraki in Season 6 and more. And then Cersei talked about how Daenerys tortured and burned alive the nobles of Meereen at random, and some pointed out, well, the crucifixion scene and the scene with one of her dragons burned a single solitary noble alive, and said, well, this is true as well. Now, I can forgive Cersei for being obtuse or purposely bending the truth for her advantage in this manner, but those who've seen the show know full well that the crucifixions were a direct response to the Masters crucifying the same amount of young, innocent children, they did this just to piss Daenerys off. And it also ignores that the singular noble that was burned alive was a direct response to the murder of her top advisor, Barristan Selmy, and multiple terrorist attacks where multiple unsullied second sons and innocent bystanders were brutally murdered. And so, of course, Cersei would twist the truth in this, but the fact anyone watching the show would think that she makes a good point. Well, they obviously have a blinding bias against Daenerys. I'm not saying she's perfect. Daenerys has many faults, and I'm sure we'll see more of them. But come on. Cersei's propaganda is far from accurate. And basically, it just amounts to slander, fear-mongering, and yes, even a good touch of racism for good measure. Anyway, let's talk about Qyburn and his anti-dragon weapon. Now, I read a spoiler that Qyburn would be working on a weapon against the dragons. However, as I stated before, the plot leaks are not really all in one convenient place to read and are more of like scattered all over the net. So some of the leaks I've read weren't real leaks and were just fake ones made up by others. I didn't know many others who read this particular spoiler about the dragon killer, so frankly I was doubting its validity, but it does in fact appear to be the case, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, of course, the plot leaks talk about how Viserion will be killed by the Night King and turned into a white dragon, whereas I predicted that this would not happen and that he would in fact be killed by Cersei instead. And when I did, people questioned that, saying, well, how could Cersei kill a dragon? Well, here's the answer. And as I stated in my review, you don't introduce a dragon killer into the show without having it play a role in the future. However, whether or not it actually kills a dragon is another matter, but my prediction is it will, and it will be Cersei, not the Night King, who kills the dragon, but I suppose it's possible it could be both, and two of Daenerys' dragons die, but I very strongly hope that will not be the case. In any event, I still admit this prediction is just wishful thinking on my part, as the plot leaks have not been wrong yet, and that white dragon thing was quite an important prediction, so it's hard to believe that it won't happen, but I am still hanging on to some naive hope. So now let me get into a much longer and much more detailed analysis of the implications of the sex scene between Grey Worm and Missandei. Just kidding, I don't give a crap about this scene. Instead, let's talk about that other sexy man, Samwell Tarly. Now, we know that Sam does leave Old Town and heads north, and I think it's pretty damn obvious that Sam is going to get kicked out of the Citadel for stealing books, stealing medical supplies, except for the milk of the poppy, because God forbid he steals the most useful thing he could have used in that situation, and for practicing forbidden procedures in secret. But in the rare event that the Maesters are too stupid to catch Sam, which actually isn't so far-fetched considering how this season has seemed to make a point of showing that the Maesters all have their heads too far up their own ass to notice anything, I think Sam will quit because he'll realize this, the Maesters won't help at all against the White Walkers, which was the whole point of him going there. So I'm sticking by my prediction that Samwell will in fact be made the Warden of the South by Daenerys by Jon's suggestion, once all the Tyrells and other Tarlys are dead. I don't think the fact that Sam goes to Winterfell necessarily discounts this possibility, as there are many reasons he could still go to Winterfell anyway, but I admit this prediction is a long shot, but I'm going to stubbornly hang on to it for now. So now let's move over to Westeros' new Master of Whispers, Hot Pie, and his friend Arya Stark. So, not much to say about old Arya, other than in my initial review I said I wasn't exactly sure of what she meant when she said, "That's not you," to Nymeria, but I was certain that she wasn't saying that it's not Nymeria. That was more of a metaphorical statement. Well, after I made that review, I saw the Dan and Dave stated it was specifically referring to the scene in season 1 where Ned talked about how Arya was going to become a lady and marry a noble and live in a castle and knit clothing all day, and she replied by saying, "That's not me." So basically Arya was realizing that Nymeria is also no longer just a pet that would accompany her to Winterfell, that she's not domesticated, she's now wild, and she's not the same wolf anymore. And although this isn't exactly what I said in my review, it doesn't change anything I did say, as it still goes along the same lines, that I think this line has double meaning, as it also reflects on how much Arya has changed, and perhaps foreshadowing how out of place Arya will be at Winterfell, as she's not the same person anymore. I don't think we'll see Nymeria again, though. That seemed like a proper farewell. As much as I love the direwolves and want them to play a more important role, after last year's direwolf bloodbath, I've learned to accept that the showrunners have no intention of having the direwolves play any type of role in the future. So I'm just grateful we got this one scene that was in fact very touching. In fact, I hope we don't see Nymeria again, because if we do, I'm sure Dan and Dave would just kill her, and I like this ending better for her. So finally, let me talk about Euron. I've seen a mixed reactions to him, but I'd say the majority of it was positive. In fact, I'd say the majority of responses I've seen to his first episode appearance was positive as well, but this appearance was even more so. Yeah, there's still some negative Nancys out there, but I do believe they are in a minority. I, for one, fucking loved Euron in this episode. In fact, the battle sequence was pretty great as well, as we tend not to get this detail of a battle sequence for what is obviously a minor battle, where, you know, there are two major battles coming up this season. Typically, the show would just, like, cut around most of it, and I actually kept expecting like the scene to cut and just cut straight to the end, which happens a lot like in season 1 when the Lannisters were attacked by and the Starks were attacking and Tyrion was going to battle. That battle was just skipped over entirely, and even more recently in season 5 where Stannis attacked the Boltons at Winterfell, that battle was just glossed over. So it was just what the show even more recently tends to do, because they focus more on the major battles, so any other side battles they just say cut straight to the end and the aftermath. So that I was kind of expecting that to happen here, but I guess this is what happens when the show has a much larger budget. So it was great to see, and it was really well shot too, so I'm glad they gave more attention to these secondary or minor battles. So many were complaining how improbable it would be for Euron to just happen across Yara's fleet in open water, but I actually don't have an issue with it. I came up with an excuse. A reasonable explanation as to why this may be. Granted, none of this was mentioned in the show, so I'm entirely making it up, but it makes sense to me. So, Euron told Cersei he was going to give her a gift, so obviously he was referring to someone in Daenerys' entourage. So I think it's reasonable to assume that he had a scout keeping an eye out on Dragonstone from a safe distance, who could tell him if a massive fleet was leaving and even track this massive fleet to see where they go. Or perhaps Euron simply did this himself. And then, once they were out in open water, well outside of where Daenerys could protect them, he attacked them. As I said, I entirely made this up with no evidence to back this up, but it makes sense to me. Either way, I'm fine with it. In any event, I did want to change a prediction I made earlier. As earlier, before the season started, I said that Cersei would kill Arya Sand and that Tyene Sand would survive. I'm now revising that, as I think it would make more sense if Cersei killed Tyene in front of Arya and made her watch, as that would have a sense of irony. Since Arya killed Cersei's daughter, she might want Arya to watch as she kills her daughter, so she can know what it feels like. And this episode made a point of reminding us that Tyene was Arya's daughter. We got a lot more mentions of it than we ever had in previous episodes. So I think that was clearly setting up for it to become relevant that Tyene's her daughter. So it's entirely possible that Arya will in fact survive to the end of Season 7. Perhaps Cersei keeps her alive in the same manner she kept Septa Unella alive in order to live a long, painful, torturous life. And perhaps when she comes to the agreement with Daenerys, part of the bargain will be for Arya to be set free. That was my original prediction with Tyene. However, when you think about Arya, it makes more sense because Tyene is a sand snake whom the audiences clearly didn't like, and the showrunners are responding to this by not having them appear much and then subsequently just killing them all off. But Arya was well liked in Season 4 when she was introduced alongside Oberyn, so I could see them keeping her around. Otherwise, I don't see who they get to represent the leadership of Dorne, as I don't see them introducing another Dornish character this late in the game. Although I suppose it's possible Dorne could just become irrelevant and shoved to the side like the Stormlands. However, that would be dumb, as the Stormlands had the bulk of their military forces defeated and scattered in battle, so it makes sense for them to just disappear. Dorne's might still exists, even if their leaders are dead or captured, so I hope that that's addressed. I'm still unsure of what will become of Yara. If I had to guess, I'd say she'll be publicly executed. If my prediction about Arya and Tyene is correct, then that would all happen in a private, and I feel Cersei and Euron would want a public execution, so that must mean Yara. It was my prediction all along that Yara would be killed, but that was never confirmed in any plot leaks I saw, but we'll see. Either way, I'm still very curious to see if Cersei accepts Euron's marriage proposal upon receiving these gifts. Almost seems like she'd have to, although I don't recall any mention of Euron in the plot leaks beyond, the sea battle that we got in this episode, other than the mention that he'll be at the dragon pit scene at the end, so who knows. I'm curious to see what happens. So that's it for my further analysis video on Stormborn. Be sure to check out my review for episode 3 shortly after that's released, followed by my live discussion with Epkin Tomko, where we'll be joined by Darren from D's Reviews a couple days later, and then later in the week my further analysis video for episode 3. Also be sure to check out my channel for many more videos on other shows like Star Trek, Dark Matter, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.